Hello, YouTube visitors, viewers, and so forth. I just thought I'd do a video about the subject of legalization of the right to die and euthanasia and medically assisted dying, and so ideal and concept of mental illness and the reasons that people are opposed to just basic universal right to die. And since this Canadian law is being passed, apparently it's raising this controversy. By the pro-lifers and the psychiatrist. Who say this cannot be allowed. People are more generally supportive and understanding and more liberal, I guess, although not entirely, when the illness, the ailment, the disease that one has is physical. That is, it is something to do with the body, chronic pain syndrome, neuropathy, cancer, fibromyalgia, chronic debilitating paralysis, quadriplegia, or just the ailments and dysfunctions and disabilities that accumulate with age, with the process of inevitable aging and decline and frailty. So people are often restrictive and say only after 50 do you deserve the right to die. Apparently after that, okay, you've suffered enough for potentially decades, and now we're going to allow you to die because you're old. It seems to be a sort of ageism. They talk about ageism and age discrimination against the elderly, against the post, say, 60-year-olds. It's sort of an ageism against anyone younger than that. Say, oh, your suffering doesn't really count. You're not old enough to have these real pains. And even if you are disabled, well, you're still young, so that compensates. But, actually, there's no when they talk about mental illness, the mental, the psychological, the emotions, there's really no distinction if one is a true biologist, if one is if one does not believe in dualism of the mind and is a scientific materialist reductionist, as I am and as many physicians and psychologists are, the mind is not separate from the brain, is not a distinct property in of itself. It is simply the brain. It is the result of the processes, neurophysiological, biological processes of these billions of neurons in the cerebral cortex and in the subcortical diencephalon of the brain anatomically, and synapses and neurotransmitters going at milliseconds, firing due to voltage-gated ion channels that allow for action potentials. In the brain, in different regions or localities of our brain, are responsible for various emotional states, cognitive states. You have like the amygdala, which is fear processing and aggression and anxiety, and there's two sides to the amygdala. One is associated with more positive emotions and one more negative. You can stimulate it and induce these sensations with transcranial magnetic stimulation technology. And we have our limbic system and reward pathways, which are responsible for pleasure, production of dopamine in the subcortical substantia nigra or tegmental, the ventral tegmental area, projecting to this nucleus accumbens, which is sort of the center. And we have memory and learning with the hippocampus, and this also projects to the frontal cortex to form cues and all of this. And so it's all neurophysiological processes at bottom. That is what we, this I, this thinking, perceiving, multimodal sensory conglomeration of a consciousness is. I am whatever the brain, this organ, the brain, does. It is, we can talk about emergence and stuff like that, but essentially it's still reducible to the fundamental neurochemistry and also endocrine system and hormones and levels of testosterone or cortisol. And even as we are coming to find out and learn more about the enteric nervous system, which is the gut, the gastrointestinal tract, the digestive system, contains several million, I forget the exact number of neurons. It actually produces the majority of the serotonin in our bodies, and we increasingly understand the role of mental health through this, looking at the health of the gut microbiome and the multiple different species of gut intestinal bacteria that help or don't help in digestive processes, and this sort of a dual feedback between the brain and hormones and stress levels acting on the gut, microorganisms, and there's this line of communication sort of in connection with the brain via the vagus nerve. So essentially the brain and the body are one. The mind is the result or an emergent feature of neurobiological chemical processes happening at this micro scale in this folded up bilateral brain inside the skull. There is no distinctly inseparable, disconnected from body and environment, mind or mental phenomena. So if we want to talk about mental illness, we really need to talk about, it needs to be classified as neurological illness, and along with any other disorder of the body, this is just the nervous system, and it affects what we think of as our self, our emotions, thoughts, moods, proclivities and motivations and desires. And we still do not have an absolutely clear picture or way to measure exactly, precisely the neurotransmitter levels in the brain itself of serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, acetylcholine, all these things that contribute to mood disorders. We have progressed a lot, but there's still all kinds of interconnected variables, and reducing it to one single molecular imbalance, the chemical imbalance mythology that isn't even accepted by modern psychiatry anymore, that it's just this serotonin, and we need to give people serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And that's gonna fix it. Your mood, you're gonna be happy, you're gonna be just jumping with exuberance and joy and delight. Your anhedonia will disappear. You'll see the light, I guess. How beautiful all the trees are when we correct this serotonin deficiency. But the more prevalent but I was going to say, the more and more we know about the brain and neuroscience and neurochemistry, and the more and more sophisticated instruments and MRIs and positron emission tomographies and CTs, and the more we're able to just eliminate, if we want to talk about philosophy of mind and eliminative materialism, these psychological states of being and emotions and to fundamentally physical brain events and states. And functions. Functional organizations, oscillations, frequencies, the amounts of neurotransmitters, the amounts of hormonal influences, the more and more we know and understand about the brain, neuroanatomy, the more and more psychology, psychiatry, the study of the mind becomes subsumed and taken over by neurology. And that's why we have this whole new field of sort of psychology, which is more focused on neuroscience and going into the neurology, neurobiology of it all, of one's psychological mood, states, and temperaments. This neuropsychology. But I was just going to say, these psychiatric drugs, the SSRIs, the SNRIs, the antipsychotics, the pharmacological interventions that people are getting handed out like candy are not effective, and in fact it's only something like 30% success rate, and they also come with loads of negative, worsening side effects, as you can see right on the commercials for these drugs, like Prozac, Zoloft, Abilify, Lexapro, Lamictal, and all the other classes. Pretty terrible, detrimental side effects, just low. I mean, if you are like sexually active, I mean, very low, decreased libido, and sexual dysfunction happens, or it actually increases one's suicidality. In many cases, it affects concentration, causes fatigue, tiredness, loss of just muscle spasms and seizures, alters the mood, but alters it in a way that's not preferable, like making someone more irritable and frustrated and angered easily, and just intensifying rage, which is what happened to me when I was on Prozac. I was on Zoloft, made me feel like a zombie. It was more like I was on high doses of Xanax or something. It was just like constant fatigue, just like you're on sleeping pills or barbiturates or something, and no effect on the depression. It was just extreme tiredness, and the Prozac was anger and irritability, and let's see. Lamictal did nothing, kept raising the doses, nothing. And the higher I got, the more I became just, and I don't know if this is correlation or causation or different factors, but I just became more sad and crying more constantly, almost every night. And this wasn't on the lower doses of Lamictal that had really no effect, but there's also just environmental and situational reasons that I had for being more upset, and maybe this Lamictal was just able to push it in this direction further, in order that I cannot contain the tears. I don't know the exact mechanisms of tear production, and how sometimes you feel really sad but you don't cry, and other times you do. But all these drugs are not an instant healer, and then the fundamental question is, do we have the right as a society, as a government, to force people to take these these psychological prescription medications. Knowing the side effects, knowing the sort of ineffectiveness, just highly variable, highly uncertain whether or not they will even work. I don't think so. And I don't think that should be a prerequisite requirement or something you must do to earn your right to euthanasia. Because when you look at the broader picture, the biopsychosocial analysis rather than purely biomedical, there is your mood, your mind, your emotional state, your ability to be happy, to conjure up happiness, or not, or fail or be unable to do so, is predicated on your environment and your situation, your family, your economic, socioeconomic status, financial security, whether you're I mean, it is a reaction, it is a natural reaction, even evolutionarily, to hardship, to stress, to a toxic environment, a toxic culture, a dog-eat-dog, work-till-you-drop, neoliberal corporate capitalism. And just all this stuff we have to do in life, our requirements and our obligations and our duties to be adults in, you have to work and you have to work more and more hours for less and less pay, and you have to do this for the majority of your life. And well, I myself am on disability because I have not specifically for mental problems, but more physiological, pelvic floor dysfunction and muscular spasms, tightness, and traction. It could be something involved with pudendal nerve. It's still not exactly sure. Like pelvic floor physiotherapy has not done much to eliminate this discomfort and malformation and tightness of the muscle and other symptoms with I had a rectal prolapse surgery, which is kind of related to having this gene for a connective tissue disorder, which is basically a type of EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I don't have as much as some other family members with the hypermobile and the stretchy skin and the joints that come out more easily, and osteoporosis and chronic pain, and sort of associated with the classical and hypermobile EDS, but I do have this pelvic dysfunction and problems in the stomach and with motility, and rectal prolapses are one of the signs of, or more, you have more of a likelihood of a chance of developing if you have a connective tissue disease. It's pretty rare to happen to someone in my age range, so there's probably some causal connection, but it's still have this feeling of like an urge to have bowel movements, or now I think I might have anal fissures because there's blood coming out of either in the stool, sort of wrapped around the fecal matter, and or just when I wipe. And I know this is getting all disgusting, but it's just what I'm living with and how this is evolving over the last 7 or so years. Now I lost track of thought, but I was talking about the environment and people's situations in life. And how that contributes to our feelings and our sort of our behaviors, our moods and internal states of consciousness. It's not just the brain in a vacuum, in total isolation from all this incoming stimuli, and I mean, some of us have traumatic upbringings, childhood abuse. I can't even imagine, like rape and incest, and your parents are drug addicts, and you're put up for adoption, and all this stuff, and all of this affects the brain and the cerebrum, and has effects on the developing prefrontal cortex, and leads to greater levels of glucocorticoids and cortisol, and these stress, and prolonged periods of just stress and hypertension and just health problems in general with the body, which then affects, which, as I was saying, the brain, the neurons, all this is the body, and that is the mental image, the self, the identity is identical and just sort of one side of the same coin. It's all one substance if we're talking about materialist monism rather than this dualism of the mind. But this whole idea that mental illness makes one unable to think rationally. This is the trope or some always trotted out by psychiatrists and therapists and so on, that if you are depressed, you have a cognitive distortion and cognitive bias. You're not rational. This is all just a result of your disease. They act like you're crazy. It's very infantilizing, and they talk about destigmatizing. This is stigmatizing. That is the epitome of stigmatizing. They act like some brain eating amoeba or alien has taken over your rational prefrontal cortex, frontal lobe, dorsolateral frontal cortex, and just like is sending in negative signals and emotions like this some alien slime attached to you, and you're no longer the real you. Wouldn't think this way. It's only because of the brain snatcher mental illness that you are perceiving your life negatively and don't have the will to live and are not interested and committed to survival and prolongation of this bodily organism for as long as possible, and can't suffer through it and trudge along like some of these other people. So you're out of touch with reality. It's like there are mental disorders, psychological disorders, neuropsychological disorders like psychosis or dissociative identity or schizophrenia, which you become, which does cause this out of touchness with reality, this derealization, hallucinations, voices in your head telling you to commit horrible acts, like seen in schizoaffective disorder, and there's these and stuff like where you lose connection or with your body and see elves and God and believe that you're like paranoid schizophrenia. John Hinckley thinks that if he shoots Reagan, he's going to get Jodie Foster to love him, and all this is completely warped, delusional, out of touch. You can definitively call this irrational, lacking clarity, just distortion. This textbook example of what would truly be called craziness or madness, if you will. But to get to stuff like depression or what's called just more moderate or even severe depression, and you're not irrational, you're not believing in insane nonsense and thinking you're on planet Venus. This is not a symptom of depression. Like, where's the distortion? Where's the disconnection? The out of touchness, the loss of identity, the loss of the sense of a fragmentation of the self and all this. None of this is happening in what we call depression. And in fact, and then we can get into psychological studies in the phenomena of depressive realism, where they do these studies and people who are more depressed have more accurate perception of themselves in reality, or closer to it. They lack what is a cognitive illusion, or a positive illusion in psychology, the optimism bias. They're not as affected or have as much as this overestimated view of their power and control and then we just have this statistical fact that people with higher intelligence and higher IQs have a greater tendency and likelihood of being depressed. I mean, Einstein was depressed. Are these... It's like how is this sort of like contradicts with illness? Like, intelligence is this great thing, and we see it as people are more rational, more analytical, more skeptical, more scientific, yet they're also more prone to being depressive or melancholic. And these people can be scientists, mathematicians. They can articulate themselves well. They can be college educated, have degrees, and be psychiatrists and dentists and doctors. And you're just gonna call them all, oh, you're all irrational, you're all delusional, you're all suffering from something that's impacting your perception and negativity bias, and it's like it. Well, what about positivity bias? What if things don't get better? It gets better. Such a convenient, just flippant platitude. No, it doesn't get better as some universal objective truth. In many cases, it gets worse. The illness worsens. You get more pain. Your back weakens. The spinal columns, bulging discs. You age. You get scoliosis, arthritis. Your gums start getting more gum disease and loosening teeth and needing dentures. Your hearing starts diminishing. Your eyesight. You need glasses. I don't see this as getting better. If one is already depressed in their youth, and then they're supposed to get better as their body ages and their skin wrinkles and they get more pain in their legs and less able to even perform the basic daily functions. And just have joint pain and all this just having to spend more and more time at doctor's offices, more and more time. And then the worst of it, needing to maybe go into a nursing home, and that's always a fun, lovely experience to be in, right? Weakened immune systems. I mean, during COVID, all these people just locked in. Well, it's kind of like a prison for old people, essentially. If I was to die now, or cease to exist at some young age, I would avoid all of this future suffering. I would be they ever say, you'll miss out on the positives, even though no one exists to be deprived of any pleasures and or feel this missing out, but you won't. But they don't talk about how you won't have to suffer from aging, from cancer, from COPD, from cardiovascular disease, and need to get open heart surgery, or just the infinite amount of risk that could be, and that exist in this world, in this life, just inherently. Yeah, why can't someone deduce and come to some logical, philosophical conclusion that, yes, I'd rather just not be here. I'd rather just be dead. Like, for the billions of years before I was born, there was no brain experiencing conscious sensation, no sentience. I wasn't bothered or deprived or diminished or in any sort of lack or want or frustrated desire. No, simply nothing. So why can't you inject me with a overdose of morphine or fentanyl or Nebutal and put me to sleep, and then that's it, and I can disappear back into that nothingness? Why is that a wrong, like ontologically and objectively wrong? Why is survival and persistence and continuation good, and termination and annihilation bad for a person. Then I just wanted to read this article. It's from the London Journal of Primary Care, published in the National Library of Medicine. It's a free article available, and it's about assisted suicide. The title is, "Does Suicide Always Indicate a Mental Illness?" And it says, decisions regarding end of life are encountered more frequently than before. Recently, there have been debates and disputes over physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. This is a British journal. The debate has become more intense following the assisted suicide bill. The number of British people who have visited Dignitas in Switzerland for assisted suicide has doubled from 2005 to 2006. Two high-profile cases brought the issue of physician-assisted suicide back into public discourse. First, 45-year-old multiple sclerosis sufferer Debbie Purdy took her case to court in order to protect her husband from prosecution when assisting to end her own life. Then Daniel James, a 23-year-old rugby player who had become paralyzed in an accident, ended his life in Switzerland. These cases challenge the idea that suicide necessarily arises from a mental illness. Physician-assisted suicide highlights this challenging question. Is intent to commit suicide prima facie evidence for a disease of the mind? Burgess and Halton highlight the difficulties psychiatry encounters when facing suicide. They claim that not all who commit suicide are mentally ill, and also that mental illness is often not clearly distinguishable from normal distress. However, considering the difficulties in treating mental illnesses, the author suggests there seems to be no a priori reason why psychiatrists should always find themselves bound to try to prevent suicide. The case of Dr. Chabot provides some insight into this problem. Dr. Chabot helped a 50-year-old social worker commit suicide. The case was taken to the Netherlands Supreme Court. The court did not question the rationality. The Dutch Society of Psychiatrists Committee, following the Chabot case, took the position that suicide should not be considered an a priori psychopathological phenomenon. The extent to which someone is expressing their free will and is capable of being responsible for their actions is important to establish when deciding whether suicide indicates a psychopathological state of mind. The principle of autonomy, integral to a free society, requires that a person's decisions regarding their own life should be respected whenever possible. According to UK law, every adult is assumed to have capacity until proven otherwise. And, well, that's about it.